At Thanksgiving dinner, her sister grabbed the unlocked iPad, then shouted to the whole table, "She's a millionaire." She lied to all of us. Claire didn't flinch. After 2 decades of being overlooked, she finally let the silence break. This is the story of a woman who built a $22 million empire while her family never once asked how she was doing. Would you have done the same? Watch till the end and tell us what would you have said at that table. They called me the girl with calculators instead of feelings, and I started believing them. It started with numbers. Numbers made sense. They didn't frown when I didn't wear pink. They didn't laugh when I forgot to smile. At 8, I could solve quadratic equations in my head, but I still didn't know how to respond when Aunt Jane said Claire's just different. Different. That was the word they all agreed on in a house where sameness was sacred. The Walker family farm was a cathedral to tradition. The floors creaked in protest of change. The walls smelled of cinnamon and quiet judgment. Every room seemed to whisper that conformity was the price of admission, and I never quite managed to pay. At the 2006 Ohio State Math Invitational, I won first place. My picture was in the local paper holding a trophy almost bigger than my chest. I carried it home like treasure. Mom looked up from folding Bailey's pageant dress, smiled faintly, and said, "That's nice, dear. Did you remember to feed the chickens? Bailey won second place in the junior baking competition that same week." The kitchen exploded with applause and flour. There were balloons. Cousins came over. Dad grilled steaks. Grandpa raised a toast with his root beer. I watched from the hallway, my trophy tucked under the couch where no one tripped over it. I remember one night in the barn sitting cross-legged beside Grandpa William. We were fixing the static in his old radio. He was one of those men who smelled like pipe tobacco and thyme. I handed him a soldering iron without him asking. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said, peering at the wires. "No one listens." He chuckled, not unkindly. "You don't talk much, but you see everything." That's rarer than it sounds, kid. He was the only one who looked at me like I wasn't broken. By 2007, Bailey had been accepted to the Florida School of Broadcasting, a private college by the beach. Everyone called it her calling. Dad talked about palm trees. Mom bought her a new suitcase in rose gold. They paid the first year's tuition before Christmas lights were up. When I got into Midwestern Tech, ranked top 5 in the nation for software engineering, Dad said, "That's the public one, right?" In-state tuition, Mom added, "You'll find a way. You always do." I worked at Subway after school, pressing my name tag into my chest like it might unlock some alternate identity. Engineer by day, sandwich artist by night. Bailey joked once, elbowing me at the dinner table. Everyone laughed. I didn't. My homemade smartwatch, Frankenstein from spare parts, Grandpa let me salvage, buzzed on my wrist. It was a gift to myself, a secret signal that even if no one else paid attention, I did. I was here. I existed. No one came to my scholarship ceremony. They were too busy planning Bailey's going-away party. There were mood boards, cake tastings, custom banners. I emailed my financial aid advisor from the barn piglets, squealing softly in the distance. When I left for college, I didn't cry. I didn't wave. I packed 2 suitcases and one silent promise I would build a life they could never ignore without asking them to notice. When I made my first million, I celebrated with ramen and an unread message from Mom asking if I'd found a job yet. It was shrimp-flavored, the cheap kind. The packet of dehydrated vegetables never fully softened, but I didn't mind. I slurped in silence, legs crossed on the floor of my shoebox apartment in Brooklyn. The room smelled faintly of dust, solder, and leftover ambition. My inbox pinged transaction confirmed. 18 million wired to our company's account. I stared at the number, then at the plastic bowl, then back again. Nate, my co-founder, was already halfway through a bottle of champagne at some rooftop bar in Soho. He'd left a voicemail. I didn't listen. "Big win, Claire," he'd probably said. We did it, But I was the one who wrote the code that saved a hedge fund from a 299ers phishing scam. I was the one who slept under her desk 3 nights a week for 6 months straight. I didn't need to hear the message to know it would feel like noise. The next morning, I transferred my cut to an account under a pseudonym, bought a secondhand Herman Miller chair, and ordered groceries for the week. The rest I invested quietly, methodically. By the time Nate exited the startup for good to explore wellness retreats, I had already mapped the blueprint for my own firm, Obscura Systems. I didn't want the flash. I wanted control. Obscura specialized in elite-level financial data protection. My first 5 clients were high-net-worth individuals with too much to lose and too little technical literacy. I didn't pitch. I encrypted, and I delivered. The first breach came in 2016. A client's offshore portfolio was under attack, brute force entry attempts from 6 different time zones. I canceled dinner, booted up the system, rerouted every firewall by hand. I wrote emergency patches between gulps of cold coffee and lines of C++. When I finally stabilized the network, I realized my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the rush. I wasn't just good. I was critical. No one in my family knew. That was by design. Bailey once texted, "Saw a girl on the subway who looked like you. Are you still in the city?" I didn't answer. 2 days later, she posted a boomerang of her sipping rosé on a rooftop tagged, "Shutcha work hard, slay hard." The caption read, "Mondays don't suck when you're doing what you love." Thanksgivings blurred into one another. I'd fly home with modest gifts, a scented candle here, a coffee table book there. Mom would unwrap them, smile politely and ask, "Still figuring life out?" "Huh, honey." Dad would pat my shoulder like I was recovering from something invisible. Bailey would show off new headshots or talk about the segment she was prepping, tips to keep your man through the holidays. Aunt Jane would raise an eyebrow. Grandpa's chair stayed empty. I never corrected them. I never lied either. Omission became my second language. By 2022, Obscura had contracts across 3 continents. I signed a $4.2 million deal with a global banking conglomerate on a Thursday. That night, Bailey posted a behind-the-scenes clip of her new TV set captioned, "Dreams really do come true. Morning Muse with Bailey." I sat on the floor again, different apartment, better lighting, but same cheap bowl of noodles. This time I splurged on pork flavor. My calendar chimed Zurich Client Summit Deck 2nd. I tapped snooze. Next Thanksgiving, I'll host. I've got a little saved up, and a lot to say without saying anything at all. I didn't plan to expose the truth. I planned a meal so perfect they'd have to look at me if only for a second. The house smelled like cinnamon turkey and nostalgia lacquered in passive aggression. I arrived at dawn wearing a gray wool dress and low-heeled boots polished just enough to whisper respectability. The chef Marcus, though no one asked, arrived 30 minutes later in a beat-up sedan that belied his resume. A private hire from Manhattan, trained in French technique, discreet by nature. He unpacked truffle paste and chanterelle mushrooms without a word. "I told them you were a friend from New York," I murmured. He nodded, tying his apron. "They won't remember my name anyway." Bailey was already there, swirling tea in a porcelain mug like it was a scepter. Her hair curled just right, her lipstick matched the cranberry sauce. She leaned in when she greeted me, air-kissing my cheek like we were on camera. "Hosting this year," she said. "How domestic of you." "I had some time," I replied. The table was set with imported linens, heirloom china from Grandma's locked cabinet, and floral arrangements flown in from a boutique in Napa. I told Mom I'd found a florist on Etsy. She seemed thrilled. "Oh, Claire," she said, touching the tablecloth. "You're finally finding your place." Bailey giggled. "Still minimalist, but make it festive." No one asked about the wine, but they drank it like confession. A Pinot aged 18 years older than my cousin's girlfriend. The stuffing had foie gras. The pie had gold leaf garnish. I heard whispers from the hallway. "She's doing better, huh? Maybe she found someone. Or maybe she's just copying Bailey's taste." Every compliment felt like a test I hadn't meant to pass. During dessert, I placed my iPad on the counter to check the timer on the apple tart. The screen lit up with a gentle glow and stayed awake like a sleeping animal breathing just beneath the surface. I didn't close the financial dashboard. I didn't lock the calendar tab titled Zurich, Deck 2 Global Account Onboarding. Bailey reached for the tart, noticed the screen, and froze. Her eyes narrowed, scanning numbers, contracts maps. Her hand trembled. The fork in her other hand clattered to the floor. "Are you kidding me?" she whispered. Then louder, "Are you kidding me?" Everyone turned. "Claire is a millionaire," she said, voice rising like a siren. She's been hiding it for years. Look at this 22 million in net assets. She has contracts with international banks. She's flying to Switzerland next week. The room stopped. Aunt Jane's fork hovered midair. My mother paled. Dad's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Bailey stepped forward, eyes glossy. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why did you pretend to be like us? My fingers curled around the stem of my wine glass. I rose slowly, lifting it like a quiet weapon. You didn't ask? I said. I just stopped answering. My silence wasn't deceit, it was the only way I could survive being ignored. The dining room, just hours before alive with clinking glasses and surface-level warmth, now felt embalmed in cold stares and shattered pride. Candle wax dripped silently onto the tablecloth as if mourning decorum's death. No one touched the pie. Bailey was the first to speak again, her voice a trembling wire. You had $22 million and you said nothing. We're family, Claire. She said the word family like a moral high ground, like it absolved a decade of dismissals and dinner table jabs. Claire leaned back in her chair, spine straight, hands folded. I didn't say anything. She replied, tone even. That's not the same as lying. Linda's eyes brimmed with tears, though none had yet fallen. We've spent years worrying about you. You'd come home with those little gifts, always looking so tired. We thought you were struggling. You assumed I was failing. Claire corrected. You never asked. George cleared his throat. Okay. Let's all just take a breath. This is a lot. Claire, maybe we could channel some of this success towards something positive. Help Bailey launch that skincare line she's been talking about? You two could team up? Sisters. Bailey's mouth opened in agreement, her head already nodding. Claire stared at them both with something close to pity. Of course, Claire said slowly, now that I'm finally useful. A murmur rippled across the table. Someone, an uncle, a cousin, mumbled something about sharing the wealth. A second relative asked if she could recommend a good investment app. Claire's eyes scanned the table. All these people who had watched her grow up in silence. She didn't feel anger. She felt distant. Like she was watching a documentary of her own life narrated in a language no one here had bothered to learn. Then, unexpectedly, Aunt Jane spoke. Perhaps, she said quietly, setting down her glass, we should ask why no one ever asked Claire about her life. The room stilled again. I remember the year she got into MIT, Jane continued. She was 18. We were all at that recital, Bailey's solo. Everyone was fussing about the flowers, the dress. Claire was reading alone in the foyer. I asked what she was reading, and she said, my acceptance letter. Linda blinked rapidly. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Claire repeated. You never asked. Bailey stood, voice brittle. So what, you punish us by keeping secrets, by throwing this display just to make us feel small? Claire stood too, but with none of Bailey's hysteria. No, she said. I threw this dinner because I thought maybe for once you'd see me. Not as Bailey's sister. Not as the weird one. Just me. But even now you're not looking at me. You're looking at my bank account. Her smartwatch buzzed softly. She glanced at it. Flight to Zurich. T, 72 hours. Linda stepped forward. Claire, please. We're still your family. Claire turned to her, quiet steel in her eyes. I don't owe you anything. Not explanations. Not $1. Not Thanksgiving. And she walked out of the dining room. No one followed. Not even Bailey. I didn't leave to be cruel. I left because staying meant erasing myself again. The silence in the car wasn't heavy, it was clean. The kind that came after static finally clears from an old radio the same way it had that summer she and Grandpa fixed his ancient shortwave together. The difference was this time no one was sitting in the passenger seat guiding her hands. She knew what she was doing now. Claire merged onto the highway, Ohio, shrinking in the rearview mirror like a bad dream she was finally ready to wake from. She rolled down the window. Cold wind lashed against her face, but she didn't mind. It was honest, unlike the warmth she'd just left behind. Her phone buzzed on the console. Bailey, we need to talk. 10 minutes later. So that's it. You're ghosting your own family. Then I didn't mean to blow up like that. But you blindsided us. Me. Finally nothing. Claire tapped and held the thread. Delete. She stopped at a roadside coffee shop just before the Pennsylvania border. The barista was new and nervous misspelled her name on the cup. Claire didn't correct her. She sat by the window, stirred her drink, and for the first time in years took a photo of herself not posed, not ironic. Just there. Her eyes looked tired, but her mouth hinted at something close to peace. She posted it with no caption. Back in Manhattan, the apartment welcomed her like a well-kept secret. Minimalist high-ceilings walls lined with books and clean surfaces. A small painting her grandfather had made in retirement, an abstract swirl of gears and constellations hung above her desk. Her assistant had left a voicemail. Zurich is confirmed. The summit wants to list you as keynote, and they're asking for a press photo and short bio. Claire exhaled. She hadn't spoken in front of a crowd since high school debate, where she'd stammered through a speech on net neutrality while classmates snickered at her haircut. But this was different. This was hers. The next morning, she pulled out an old canvas backpack from the back of her closet. It still had the MIT patch fraying at the corner. Inside, amid receipts and faded class notes, was a yellowed envelope addressed in her grandfather's steady hand. She opened it. Claire, they'll doubt you. They'll try to talk over you. That's what people do when they know they've underestimated someone. Let them. Just don't join them. You've got everything you need. Granddad. She didn't cry. She smiled, folded the letter, and slipped it into the lining of her carry-on. Later that afternoon, Claire walked into a downtown animal shelter, filled out a form, and met a wiry, wide-eyed mutt with pixelated fur patterns and a crooked tail. She named him Pixel. He licked her wrist once and curled up on her coat as if he'd always belonged there. That night, she swapped her smartwatch. The old, clunky prototype worn like armor for years went into a drawer. In its place, a sleek silver watch polished, quiet, precise. The kind worn by people who knew exactly when to leave a room. At JFK, the lounge buzzed with the low hum of travelers with important places to be. Claire sipped tea, checked her boarding pass, and watched Pixel snooze under her chair in his airline-approved crate. Her phone lit up again. One more message from Linda. We love you. Please come home for Christmas. Think about Bailey. Claire turned off the screen. As the plane ascended, slicing through a sky darker than midnight coffee, she leaned into the window. Below her, the lights of 1,000 lives flickered like unresolved stories. She whispered to the glass, "Don't look back. This time last year, I served silence with wine. This year, I serve freedom with pie." Snow whispered down like secrets onto the Vermont cabin roof. The fire crackled in its stone cradle, flickering gold light against the rough-hewn beams. Claire moved quietly through the small kitchen, rolling dough between her palms, pressing it gently into a pie tin. Her hands, once used for coating firewalls and building encryption systems, now worked the edges of a crust with a kind of reverence. It was her first pie. Not bought, not catered, not perfect, but entirely hers. Pixel lay curled by the hearth, his tail flicking lazily in rhythm with the flames. A worn flannel blanket draped over the arm of the couch. And on the windowsill, a small photo of Claire at 8 years old beside her grandfather, holding up a soldered circuit board with pride. It wasn't framed, just tucked there. Safe. The knock at the door was light but steady. Claire opened it to a gust of icy air and the bundled figure of Aunt Jane, cheeks pink, eyes bright. You made pie. Jane grinned, unwinding her scarf. Claire shrugged, but her smile peeked through. Sort of. They sat at the small wooden table, 2 plates, 2 mugs of cider. Claire poured, and they toasted with a quiet clink. To choosing our own tables, Jane said. Claire nodded, and not apologizing for it. They talked about everything and nothing. Jane told a story about George falling asleep in a lawn chair at Bailey's 4th of July party. Claire laughed, genuinely, not politely. Halfway through the meal, Jane reached into her bag and pulled out a journal wrapped in thin twine. He left it to you. Said it'd make sense someday. Claire untied the knot slowly, reverently. The leather was cracked, the pages delicate. One had a corner turned down. She opened it and read, "Claire has her own orbit. Someday we'll all be lucky just to exist in it." Her throat caught, not from grief, but recognition. "I used to think love meant being chosen," Claire said, staring into the fire. "Now I think it just means being seen and not shrinking under it." They finished the pie crumbly, slightly burnt at the edges. Neither of them cared. When Jane retired to the guest room, humming an old tune under her breath, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table. Pixel rested his head on her foot. She reached for her laptop, opened a new document, and titled it, "Memoir, the Girl They Forgot." No hesitation. Outside, the snow had thickened, blanketing the world in hush. Claire stood at the cabin's front step, cider in hand, wrapped in a wool shawl. Her phone vibrated once on the counter, then again. She didn't look. She powered it off. The stars overhead pulsed gently like they knew her name now. This was the Thanksgiving I finally gave myself everything I'd ever been denied. Beneath the snow-laced sky of a quiet Vermont Thanksgiving, she didn't need applause or permission, only truth and the space to breathe it. What was once silence born of erasure became a shield forged by self-worth. Justice didn't come from confrontation alone, but from the courage to walk away and never shrink again. Like a circuit finally closed, her story proves no wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. And sometimes choosing your own table is the loudest victory of all.